Welcome to NEWS.am. My guest is Senior Fellow with Carnegie Europe, Thomas de Waal. Thank you very much, Mr. de Waal, for this opportunity, for your time. We'll discuss the ongoing negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan on normalization and on the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. The Minsk group doesn't function. In fact, the Assistant Secretary of the United States, Karen Donfried, announced recently that the United States is ready to cooperate with Russia in the framework of the Minsk group. But the Russian side stresses that if Washington and Paris really considered the format of the Minsk group important, they wouldn't try to isolate Russia from this process, and that the damage to this format is irreparable. So what do you think? Do you see any opportunities of cooperation between the United States, Russia and France on the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Yes, I would agree that I think the Minsk group co-chair format is now, it's not exactly dead, but it's completely frozen. There are a number of reasons. One is obviously Russia's mediation after the 2020 war without the other Minsk group co-chairs. The other is opposition of Azerbaijan, basically to the Minsk group. They still receive the Minsk group co-chairman, but basically as individuals, not as an institution. And thirdly, the breakdown in relations between Russia and the West because of the war in Ukraine. For all those reasons, I don't think we can expect the Minsk group to do diplomacy anytime soon. I guess what's important is that the special representatives now, as they are renamed, continue their negotiations from, particularly from France and the United States. That's important. Obviously, it's important that the record of documents from the Minsk group co-chairs is not forgotten. I'm particularly thinking of the Tirana statement of December 2020, when France and the United States basically approved with some, in slightly different language, that they approved the 2020 trilateral statement. And I'm also thinking of the statements where the Minsk group presidents of France, the United States and Russia also talked about the framework of the agreement within the principles of the Helsinki Final Act: territorial integrity, self-determination and non-use of force. So that's all important. But now obviously we have two players on the scene, Moscow and Brussels, and that's where we expect to see results, if we do see results.
You've stressed in your recent analysis that the European Union has become the main mediator currently between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and that the European mediation gives real chances for peace and stabilization in this region. But it's a well-known fact that Russia is the only peacekeeper currently in Nagorno-Karabakh. It's the only state that have real power to maintain peacekeeping forces in Nagorno-Karabakh as a stabilizing factor in this region. So how is it possible to reach a comprehensive solution of the conflict and the sustainable and security in this region without the engagement of Russia, and moreover excluding Russia from this process?
Well, it's a funny process at the moment. Obviously, Brussels and Moscow are both mediating on some of the same issues, whether it be about transport, communications or border demarcation. But I think there's obviously an understanding in the European Union that Russia is the peacekeeper in Karabakh. It's the Russian peacekeeping force, even though it's Russian peacekeeping force, is a stabilizing factor in the short term. But I think there's also an understanding in Moscow that Armenia and Azerbaijan trust a more, shall we say, a more neutral negotiator, the European Union, which does not have these strong bilateral interests in Armenia and Azerbaijan. So Brussels and Moscow kind of continue in parallel, shall we say, and I think they agree on many things. They do not agree on everything, but I think they agree on enough to try and continue their processes in parallel. And I would say that in the next few months, the most important issue is whether there can be an agreement on transport and communications, road and rail links connecting Nakhchivan to Western Azerbaijan, giving Armenia access to Iran, Russia, perhaps even Turkey. This is, I think, a shared interest between Brussels, Moscow, and all the countries in the region.
You have argued also that European Union's motivation in this process is to facilitate peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan in these negotiations. But on the other hand, European Union has vital interests in energetic sector in Central Asia, in the Caspian Basin, and in the South Caucasus. This region is a transit route from these above-mentioned regions to Europe in terms of transportation of gas. So, and after the Ukrainian crisis, reducing the dependence on the Russian gas is more vital interest and problem for the European Union currently. So, doesn't the European active engagement in this conflict has long-term objectives connected to the gas transportation from these regions to Europe? What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's obviously that's absolutely correct that European Union identifies Azerbaijan as a partner and gas supplier, and that gives Azerbaijan more influence. Absolutely, that's true, to increase gas imports from Azerbaijan, from Shah Deniz, and possibly as part of a southern gas corridor through Georgia and Turkey. That's absolutely the case, and that increases, as it were, the influence of Azerbaijan in Brussels. But I guess the other thing to say is that on many levels, the European Union has a closer relationship with Armenia. That it signs the CEPA agreement with Armenia, with the Pashinyan government, and in terms of kind of European integration, Armenia is closer than Azerbaijan. So absolutely, I think it's fair to say that the European Union has a strong interest in all three countries of the Caucasus, and we've seen that with Georgia being an upgraded status as an EU aspirant country just in the last few days. Not the same, they didn't achieve the same as Ukraine and Moldova, but it's still a big improvement on what they had only a few months ago. So I would say it's not just about Azerbaijan, it's about all three countries in the region.
Mr. Deval, but do you think that the European Union can be an impartial mediator between Armenia and Azerbaijan, taking into account also Azerbaijan's interests and cooperation with Azerbaijan in the energetic sector, which, as I mentioned, has a vital importance for the European Union?
Yes, I think it can. And I just outlined, I think, why that is the case, that obviously the European Union has interests not only in Azerbaijan, but also in Armenia and in Georgia as well. And I think the European Union has a strong interest in opening up a southern corridor which connects Azerbaijan, Megri region, or southern Armenia, Nakhchivan, across down to Iran and through to Turkey. So I think that's very much in the European Union's interest. And I think the other thing to say about the European Union activity is that, unlike Moscow, they are facilitating bilateral talks between the Baku and Yerevan. They are helping a track between Hikmet Hajiev and Armin Grigoryan, where no one else is in the room. Moscow does not allow that, and they're happy to see border commissions between Armenia and Azerbaijan meet without anyone else. So I think for those reasons, they're not, no one is a completely honest, neutral broker. Everyone has their agenda, but I think they have a more neutral agenda here than Moscow does, yes.
Your main conclusion regarding the possible status of Nagorno-Karabakh, stressed in your recent analysis, is the following: that Azerbaijan should give some rights to Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, and because of economic and infrastructure factors, the future of Nagorno-Karabakh is within Azerbaijan. However, Azerbaijan categorically excludes any opportunity of discussing the core rights of the Armenian people of Artsakh. Azerbaijan doesn't want to discuss this issue. The facts how the Azerbaijani soldiers, for example, cut off the heads of Armenian soldiers, of Armenian civilians, elder people during the April War of 2016, during the Karabakh Second War, are very vivid, and many facts are also represented in the international structures. And for example, Azerbaijan destroys all the historical and religious monuments in the territories under its control, which is a proof of Armenian existence of the territories. And what refers to economic sphere and economic cooperation, in this January, Azerbaijan deliberately cut off the gas supply from Armenia, which led to a humanitarian crisis for the Armenian people in Artsakh in strict weather conditions. So, taking into account these vivid facts, so what do you think? How some kind of status of Nagorno-Karabakh within Azerbaijan can guarantee the core rights, the existence of Armenian people in that case?
Two lines in it attracted a lot of interest, obviously, on the Armenian side. Many things to say here. First of all, and I also wrote another article for Analyticon where I made this point a bit more strongly. First of all, I think when we're talking about the rights of the Armenians of Karabakh, I think the first thing to say is security is the most important right here. And this is, I would say, goes back to the core of the conflict from 1988. And this is something I've been writing about for many years, saying that the security issue is absolutely crucial, which is why I was talking about an international peacekeeping force for many years, unfortunately, before the 2020 war. At that point, the Armenian side was not interested in that, but I think the Armenian side now is more interested in that, obviously. So I think security is the first issue. And I think some kind of international security guarantees for the Armenians of Karabakh is important for many years to come. And personally, I would like to see that not just coming from Russia, which is just one country which has its own interests, but more broadly from UN, OSCE, European Union, from international institutions. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that because of, I think, many mistakes on the Armenian side, and obviously the position of the Azerbaijani side in the 2020 war, the Armenians of Karabakh are in a much more difficult position now. I think we can all agree on this. And that no one is going to recognize Karabakh, Artsakh as independent, and that includes Armenia. So we're talking about some kind of postponed status, some kind of international security mechanism, but the whole world is basically recognizing now the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan as including Nagorno-Karabakh. So the question then is how this plays out in the future. And I made the point in that article that when it comes to water, to electricity, and probably to gas, that in the next few years, it's very likely that Karabakh will be reliant on Azerbaijan, that there will be some kind of beginning of some kind of economic integration of Karabakh into Azerbaijan. And I don't see anyone from the Armenian side giving an answer as to how Armenia can which does not, even Armenia does not even control the Lachin corridor, how Armenia could continue to be the economic guarantor of Karabakh. So I see two sides having to move towards one another. The Baku having to say what they offer the Karabakh Armenians in terms of some kind of rights in the future, and I see the Karabakh Armenians having to accept that they have some kind of future inside Azerbaijan, and that obviously comes, as I said at the beginning, with some security guarantees. Now, this is a difficult thing for Armenians to accept, but unfortunately, it's a very difficult situation. So, and if Armenians have some better ideas, I think they should propose them. But just to say that we continue to want to see independent Artsakh outside Azerbaijan, this is no longer what is accepted internationally. And I think the Pashinyan government in Yerevan understands this as well. So it's all about what kind of rights and guarantees can be made for many years to come, hopefully to reach a position where Karabakh Armenians feel safer, not completely safe, but safer with Azerbaijan.
Mr. Deval, but if Baku doesn't have any intention and any desire to discuss the core rights of the Armenian people in Nagorno-Karabakh, about which we are discussing now, and Azerbaijan continues its aggressive and militant rhetoric towards the Armenians and doesn't show any indicators that it is ready to constructive dialogue or etc. How some kind of economic cooperation can lead or make some atmosphere for comprehensive solution? This is not a territorial dispute. It is first of all an ethno-political conflict, and it is a conflict about the rights and the activities of Azerbaijan for decades, and also currently shows that Azerbaijan has no desire to solve this problem, taking into account the interests and the rights and the position of the Armenian people in Nagorno-Karabakh. How is it possible?
Well, I mean, I think this is it's an incredibly difficult conflict, and I can't say I'm optimistic about it being about any real progress on this issue anytime soon. I can be a bit more optimistic on the issue of the transport. I can be more optimistic on the issue of the border and even on Armenia-Turkey normalization. But on this issue, I cannot be very optimistic, which is why I think some kind of international security mechanism is required. But on the other hand, I think it's also dangerous for the Armenians of Karabakh. They have to offer something to Azerbaijan as well. They have to say, otherwise, how, again, I get back to very practical issues about water and electricity and gas, and maybe these indeed could also fall under some kind of international provision. When you talk to Azerbaijanis, as I do frequently, some of them that you get different messages, but some of them say, yes, we do want to. Obviously, they also have their own stories about Armenian aggression, 25 years where their lands were occupied and more than 500,000 Azerbaijanis were displaced by Armenians. That's their story, and they say, if we feel aggressive, it's because we also suffered from Armenian aggression. So there is hurt and trauma on both sides of this conflict, obviously. So that's but at some point a dialogue has to start between Stepanakert and Baku. Maybe this needs international mediation. But I don't see that just sticking to the status quo is an option in Karabakh. They need to offer something as well, the Armenians of Karabakh, and not just say we will live completely separate from Azerbaijan, because I don't think that in
Mr.
Deval, will be possible.
But we know that the conflict has begun by the aggression and atrocities by the Azerbaijan towards the Armenian minority in the Soviet era, and the last war also showed that Azerbaijan is ready to use military force and doesn't want to take into account what speaks the Armenian population. So I want to show what are the core reasons under this conflict, and which are also existing currently.
Well, I mean, what you're telling me is the Armenian version of the Karabakh conflict, and I'm familiar with that version, and it has some truth, but I wouldn't say it's 100% true, because there's also an Azerbaijani version of that truth, where Azerbaijanis also suffered, where they were expelled from their homes, they lost their homes and lived displaced by Armenians, where Armenians occupied territory and did not, and many Armenians referred to that territory as liberated territory. So unfortunately, at some point, these two versions of reality need to, as it were, be left behind, and there needs to be a third version in which Armenians and Azerbaijanis can learn to live together. Now, and I'm very clear, I'm realist about this. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it requires international guarantees and mechanisms. But just to insist that we were the only people who suffered, even in the 2020 war, there were about 150 civilians who died, and half of them were Azerbaijani civilians in places like Ganja and Terta. So it's a tragic story in which many people have suffered, but not just on the Armenian side. So I'm just again saying that dialogue needs to happen, and dialogue has to happen from both sides. And unfortunately for the Armenian side, they're now in a weaker position thanks to the 2020 war. This is also a difficult thing for the Armenians to have, but now they have an opportunity because of European Union involvement, European Union mediation, statements by Charles Michel about the rights of the Armenians of Karabakh. So I think it's important to take that opportunity and to try and to use it as well as possible.
Mr. Deval, thank you for your time and for your opinion.
Thank you. Very good to talk to you.
My guest was Senior Fellow with Carnegie Europe, Thomas Deval.